The exiled warrior trudged through the endless snow, each step sinking into the icy crust. His breath came out in thick clouds, freezing instantly in the bitter wind. The world around him was silent, except for the occasional howl of a distant predator. He had been walking for days, ever since his ship had crashed on this frozen planet. Alone and without supplies, survival was difficult. Yet, despite the biting cold and the emptiness, he felt drawn forward, guided by instinct more than reason. He had heard rumors of a hidden valley where dragons nested. In his human culture, dragons were myths, creatures of stories told to children around firelit huts. But he had seen them before, once briefly in a distant world, a glimpse through the fog of battle, and the memory had haunted him. There was something about their presence, their strength, and their quiet intelligence that called to him. And now, stranded and exiled, he felt he had a duty to protect whatever he could find, even if it was just a nest of unknown creatures. The warrior's steps slowed as he reached the edge of a cliff. Below him lay a valley shielded by jagged mountains, a hidden world untouched by hunters or humans. In the fading light, he could see faint glimmers, small warm lights that pulsed softly. He recognized them immediately. Dragon nests. He felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. These were not the tame, gentle animals humans sometimes imagined. These were dangerous, intelligent beings capable of fire, flight, and vengeance. Yet he did not hesitate. He descended carefully, making sure his steps were quiet. Every movement was measured. He did not want to alert any creatures to his presence before understanding them. As he reached the valley floor, he saw the first nest clearly. A young dragon, no bigger than a human child, lay curled inside. Its scales shimmered in the dim light, iridescent with shades of blue and silver. The hatchling lifted its head, eyes wide, studying him silently. The warrior froze, understanding that any sudden move could provoke an attack. But he did not retreat. Instead, he knelt slowly on one knee, showing submission and respect. The cold wind howled, but he felt a warmth from the dragon. Not literal warmth, but something more profound, a recognition of his presence and intent. The hatchling lowered its head back into the nest, watching him cautiously. Around him, other nests revealed tiny glimpses of life. Small wings, tiny claws, delicate horns beginning to grow. The warrior realized he was looking at a family, a generation of dragons that could be lost if the right predators, or humans, found them. Night began to fall, and with it came the predators. Large, wolf-like creatures with sharp teeth and glowing eyes prowled near the valley's edges. The warrior did not flinch. He grabbed his sword, worn and nicked from previous battles, and positioned himself between the predators and the nests. He did not shout or charge. He stood calmly, radiating a quiet confidence that seemed to confuse the predators. They circled, growling, testing him, but his presence was steady, unwavering. He would not back down. Hours passed, the cold biting into his skin, but he remained vigilant. He fed the hatchlings small pieces of meat he had scavenged, moving carefully so as not to startle them. In return, the dragons watched him with cautious curiosity, learning that he meant no harm. The warrior spoke softly, though the dragons could not understand his language. "I am here. I will not leave." "You are safe," he said repeatedly, not knowing if they could grasp his words but believing that his tone carried meaning. By the time the first light of dawn touched the valley, the predators had retreated. The warrior remained on watch, exhausted but resolute. He felt a bond forming with the dragons, a connection deeper than instinct. He understood that his exile had led him here for a reason. He had been cast out from human society, deemed unworthy or dangerous, but here in this remote valley he had a purpose. His skills, his courage, and his empathy had a place, and it was to protect these creatures who could not defend themselves fully. The dragons began to stir, small wings fluttering, tiny claws stretching. The warrior allowed himself a brief smile. He knew the road ahead would be long. There would be hunters, more predators, and the constant challenge of the harsh environment. But he no longer felt hopeless. He had a duty now, one that transcended human politics or personal shame. He was a guardian, a protector, a sentinel for a species that had existed for centuries beyond human memory. As he settled near the largest nest, wrapping himself in whatever warmth he could find, he vowed silently, "I will stay. I will fight. I will guard you until my last breath." The dragons, small and silent, seemed to understand. They curled closer to one another, their bodies radiating a soft glow that warmed the icy ground around them. For the first time since his exile, the human warrior felt a sense of belonging, a purpose greater than survival. Here, in the frozen valley, among creatures of legend, he had found a home, and he would defend it with everything he had. The sun rose higher, casting golden rays over the snow. The warrior's eyes scanned the horizon, alert for threats, yet calm in spirit. He had been alone, exiled, forgotten by his people, but in this quiet valley with dragons depending on him, he had found a new life. A life of duty, of honor, and of connection. And so, the outcast began his vigil, the first of many days where human courage and dragon trust would intertwine in a bond forged by survival, respect, and unwavering dedication. Night fell quickly over the hidden valley, wrapping the exiled warrior and the dragon nests in a thick, cold darkness. The snowstorm that had been building all day finally descended, whipping icy winds across the jagged cliffs. The warrior tightened his worn cloak around his shoulders and crouched near the largest nest. The small dragons had huddled together for warmth, their scales glinting faintly in the dim light. He could hear their soft breathing, tiny hearts beating in unison, and he felt a protective surge of determination. The valley was quiet at first, but soon the sounds of the night grew louder. Distant howls echoed off the mountains, and the crunch of unseen footsteps in the snow told him that predators were approaching. Wolves, or perhaps creatures far stranger than anything from human worlds, prowled near the valley's edges. The warrior did not panic. He had faced countless threats before, but this night was different. The creatures were not after him, they were after the dragons, the defenseless young who could not flee. He adjusted his grip on his sword, its edge nicked and dulled by years of battle. He positioned himself between the nests and the darkness beyond. Every step he took was careful, deliberate, leaving minimal footprints in the snow. The dragons watched silently, their large eyes reflecting trust and curiosity. They sensed he was their guardian. He whispered softly, "Stay calm. Nothing will reach you while I am here." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of certainty that only a warrior who had faced death countless times could muster. Suddenly, the first predator emerged from the shadows. It was massive, with glowing amber eyes and fur matted with ice. Its teeth gleamed in the faint light as it sniffed the air, catching the scent of the dragons. The warrior held his ground, sword raised, and did not flinch. The predator paused, assessing him. It had expected fear, hesitation, or flight. Instead, it found a human standing firm, calm, and resolute. Confusion flickered in its gaze, and it circled slowly, testing his reaction. Hours passed as the predator prowled, and more appeared from the darkness, drawn by the scent of the young dragons. Each time, the warrior met them with calm determination. He moved only when necessary, using precise strikes and defensive maneuvers to keep the predators at bay. He did not seek to kill them unless it was unavoidable. His goal was clear: protect the nests until dawn. The dragons watched each encounter silently, learning to trust his presence. The largest hatchling lifted its head and let out a soft, resonant sound, a low hum that seemed like a gesture of gratitude. The storm intensified, snow whipping across the valley like sharp knives. Visibility was nearly zero, but the warrior relied on his instincts. He had survived harsh conditions before, relying on skill and observation. The predators, though dangerous, could not match his focus and experience. With every clash, he adapted, using the terrain to his advantage, luring attackers away from the nests and into traps made from rocks and fallen ice. The dragons followed his movements with wide eyes, absorbing his strategy without understanding the specifics. At one point, a massive shadow leapt toward the largest nest, teeth bared. The warrior lunged forward, blocking the attack with his sword. The predator recoiled but did not retreat. For a tense moment, both predator and human froze, studying each other in mutual respect and caution. Then, with a sudden surge, the warrior struck again, forcing the creature back into the darkness. The hatchling stirred, but none had been harmed. The warrior exhaled, tension easing slightly, though he knew the night was far from over. Hours bled into the early morning, and the storm began to subside. The predators finally retreated, likely realizing that the human would not falter. The warrior lowered his sword, exhausted but triumphant. He moved among the nests, checking each hatchling, ensuring they were safe and unharmed. The small dragons chirped softly, nuzzling him in acknowledgement, a simple gesture of trust and acceptance. The exiled warrior felt a deep satisfaction. His purpose was clear, and he had proven himself capable of defending the young creatures under impossible conditions. As the first light of dawn touched the valley, the warrior allowed himself a moment to rest. He sat against a boulder, snow melting slowly against his cloak, and watched the dragons stretch and flap their tiny wings. The storm had tested him and he had endured. He understood now that his exile had not been a punishment but a path leading him here, to this hidden valley, to these creatures who needed protection. His heart swelled with resolve. The dragons began to explore their surroundings cautiously, the largest hatchling stepping closer to the warrior as if acknowledging his role as their protector. He reached out a hand, letting it brush against the creature's shimmering scales. The warmth of their bodies, fragile yet alive, filled him with a sense of connection he had never known among humans. He whispered again softly, "You are safe. I will not leave you." In that quiet moment, the exiled warrior realized something profound. His duty was not just survival, it was guardianship. The dragons had survived for centuries, but they had never known the kind of care and courage a human could offer. Through the night of trials, he had earned their trust, and in return, they had shown him a glimpse of something more: belonging, purpose, and the silent bond between species that could transcend fear and instinct. As the valley brightened under the morning sun, the warrior stood, surveying the horizon. He knew more challenges would come: rogue hunters, harsher storms, and predators even more cunning. But for this moment he felt victorious. The dragons were safe, and he had proven that even an outcast, a human deemed unworthy by his own kind, could stand as a guardian in a world of danger and legend. And so the night of trials ended. The snow fell lighter now, and the warrior, weary but resolute, prepared to continue his vigil. The dragons, small and fragile yet powerful in their presence, had accepted him. He had faced death, the storm, and predators alike, and he had prevailed. From that night forward, the exiled warrior and the dragon hatchlings were bound together by courage, trust, and the shared understanding that even in a frozen, hostile world, protection and loyalty could forge unbreakable bonds. The night was silent except for the howling wind, carrying the icy sting of the mountain air across the desolate cliffs. The exiled warrior stood at the edge of the dragon nests, watching the stars flicker faintly through the heavy clouds. He had sensed the danger long before it appeared: shadows moving in the distance, the faint glint of eyes reflecting the moonlight. Predators were approaching, creatures drawn by the scent of the young dragons. His breath formed clouds in the cold air as he adjusted his grip on his sword. He knew the predators would not hesitate, and the hatchlings had no chance against them. He had spent countless years fighting for survival, yet the thought of the dragons being harmed stirred something deeper inside him, a protective instinct stronger than fear. Each heartbeat echoed in his ears as the first shadow leapt into view. It was massive, with fur matted with frost, claws like jagged knives, and teeth glinting as it snarled. The warrior stepped forward, his stance firm, ready to face the danger head-on. The predators came in waves, each one larger and more aggressive than the last. The warrior moved swiftly, deflecting claws with precise swings and cutting paths to keep them away from the nests. But he knew this would not last. His strength, though remarkable, was not infinite. The predators were relentless, their hunger and ferocity unmatched by his endurance. His mind raced, calculating, seeking a way to protect the hatchlings without sacrificing them. Then he realized what he must do. The predators would not be deterred unless there was a greater threat: himself. He would become the bait, drawing the creature's attention entirely to himself and away from the dragons. It was a decision born of desperation, but there was no hesitation. He could not allow innocence to suffer for his survival. He took a deep breath, feeling the icy wind cut against his face, and stepped fully into the open. The predators hesitated for a moment, sensing his calm and strength. Then they charged. Steel met claw with a violent clash. The warrior moved like a shadow, dodging, parrying, and striking with skill honed over countless battles. The predators were strong, their strength overwhelming, but he held his ground, refusing to give an inch. Each movement was precise, every strike deliberate. He was tireless, driven by the need to protect the young dragons. The hatchlings watched from the nests, wide-eyed, sensing the danger and the courage of their guardian. Hours passed as the predator horde pressed in. The warrior fought without pause, even as exhaustion threatened to claim him. His muscles burned and his breathing came in ragged gasps, but he did not falter. The creatures circled, testing him, seeking an opening, and he closed each one with unerring focus. One massive predator lunged directly at the nests, and the warrior threw himself between it and the hatchlings, taking the brunt of the attack. Pain seared through his shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and continued, forcing the creature back with a swift counter. At one point he was surrounded. Shadows moved in all directions, claws slashing, teeth snapping. He spun, blocked, and struck with fluid motion, but the sheer number was too great. He was injured, bleeding from deep cuts, each step slower than the last. Yet he remained upright, a living shield between the predators and the fragile lives he had sworn to protect. The dragons, sensing his determination, stirred in a way that seemed almost like understanding. They had chosen him as their protector, and he would not fail. As dawn approached, the predators began to falter. They had underestimated the human's resilience, his unwavering resolve. The warrior, though battered and bruised, had led them into positions where they could not strike without risking themselves. One by one, the creatures retreated into the shadows, wary of the unyielding force that had defended the young dragons. The valley grew quiet once more, the wind carrying away the last echoes of the night's chaos. The warrior sank to his knees, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. Blood soaked his cloak, cuts lined his arms and face, but he felt a deep sense of relief. The dragons were unharmed. He had sacrificed his comfort, his safety, even his body to ensure their survival. The hatchlings, small and trembling, nuzzled against him as if sensing the weight of his sacrifice. They chirped softly, a sound that carried warmth and gratitude beyond words. He looked up at the emerging sun, its rays glinting off the icy cliffs and the dragon's scales. The world seemed brighter, calmer. Though he was battered and bleeding, he felt a connection to these creatures that went beyond words, a bond forged in the crucible of danger and selfless action. In that moment he understood the true meaning of guardianship. Protection was not just about strength, it was about courage, endurance, and the willingness to face death for the sake of those who could not defend themselves. The warrior stayed with the dragons until he could ensure their safety fully. He helped them adjust after the night of terror, brushing snow from their scales and murmuring soft reassurances. His body ached, but his spirit was unbroken. He had given all he could, and it had been enough. The dragons had survived, and he had proven that even an exiled human, deemed powerless by others, could stand as a legend in the eyes of beings far greater than himself. The night of sacrifice had ended, leaving its mark on both the warrior and the dragons. He had faced the brink of death and emerged not just alive, but honored in the silent language of trust and loyalty. The dragons would never forget his courage, just as he would never forget the faces of those young creatures who depended entirely on his strength. And though his body bore the scars, his heart was filled with the quiet satisfaction of a guardian who had given everything, and in doing so, had earned a bond that would last a lifetime. The mountain wind howled through the jagged cliffs, carrying with it the scent of snow and stone. High above, the dragons stirred in their nests, their eyes bright and alert. Though years had passed since the night of sacrifice, the memory of the exiled warrior lingered in their minds like a warm ember in cold stone. They had never forgotten the human who had faced death itself to protect them, and their hearts held a quiet reverence for him. The eldest dragon, scales glinting like molten silver in the sunlight, looked down toward the valley. In that same valley, life continued, humans and dragons rarely crossing paths, but the bond formed that night was timeless. The warrior's actions had shown a courage that transcended species, a willingness to place the lives of others above his own. The dragons had recognized this, not in words, but in the deep, instinctive way that only their kind could understand. In the mornings, the young dragons often played near the cliff edges, their wings catching the wind as they tumbled and leaped. Though small and vulnerable at the time, they had grown strong, and their movements carried a confidence shaped by the lessons of that night. Even now, when danger approached in the form of a prowling predator or the threat of storm, they remembered the human who had stood unyielding. His courage had become part of their instinct, a guiding memory woven into the core of their being. The dragons often told stories among themselves, the way their kind did, through rumbling growls and low vibrating sounds that carried meaning only to those attuned to it. They spoke of the warrior's selflessness, of the way he had moved among the predators with calm precision, his eyes focused on the hatchlings, never faltering. These tales were repeated to the younger generations, not as myth, but as a living truth, a lesson in bravery and loyalty. Each hatchling knew the story before it had even learned to fly, understanding that the human had earned a place of honor in their world. Sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, the dragons would catch a scent that reminded them of him. Smoky from a distant fire, earthy from the paths he had walked, faint but undeniable. They would pause in their activities, heads tilting as though listening for a voice carried across the mountains. Their memories of the night of sacrifice were vivid, replayed in the quiet moments between hunting and flight. Every claw, every scale, every beat of their wings carried a silent gratitude for the human who had risked everything for them. Far below, in the forested valleys, humans lived unaware of the legends growing in the high cliffs. Yet the warrior's story had traveled quietly through the lands. Other humans, those who dared venture into dragon territory, would sometimes find signs of respect left by the dragons. A claw-marked symbol on a stone, a shimmering scale deposited at the edge of a clearing, or a low rumble that seemed almost like a greeting. The dragons remembered, and in remembering they honored him, preserving his legacy without words. Even the youngest dragons who had not been alive when the warrior fought, sensed the weight of his actions. Their elders would pause in flight to point toward the cliffs, wings casting wide shadows across the mountainside. They would breathe softly, scales brushing together, and the young would follow, learning the unspoken code of respect and protection. The warrior's courage had become a part of their culture, a standard against which their own actions were measured. One day, a dragon perched atop the highest cliff spotted movement far below, a human wandering the valleys. Though the human was not the same warrior, the dragons observed with quiet intensity, recalling the lessons of the past. The memory of the exiled human guided their actions, teaching them discernment and trust. They approached with caution, wings folded close, yet hearts open to the possibility that the courage of humans could mirror the one they had never forgotten. At night, when the stars shimmered over the mountains, the dragons would gather on the cliffs, their eyes reflecting the constellations. They would rumble in unison, a sound deep and resonant, vibrating with memory and reverence. The story of the human who had given his life for them was etched into their very essence. It was a story without a storyteller, told through instinct and memory, passing from generation to generation. The warmth of his sacrifice remained, a beacon in their hearts that guided their decisions, their bonds, and their lives. Even when storms lashed against their scales, when hunger drove them to the edge of desperation, the dragons remembered calm and courage. They remembered the human who had faced impossible odds with steady hands and unwavering eyes. They remembered warmth, not just in the physical sense, but in the way he had held space for life to survive, in the respect he had shown for creatures weaker than himself. That memory became a cornerstone of their lives, shaping the way they interacted with the world and each other. The dragons, ancient and wise, understood that gratitude could be eternal. Though the human had long since departed, his legacy remained alive in the cliffs, in the wind, and in the hearts of those who had been saved. They would never forget. Every beat of their wings, every low rumble, every protective glance at a nest of hatchlings was a quiet homage to the exiled warrior who had shown them what it meant to defend, to love, and to act with courage without expectation. In the cold and quiet of the mountains, the dragons continued their watch. They remembered the warmth of that human presence, the bravery that had saved them, and the kindness that had marked their world forever. To the dragons, the exiled warrior was no longer just a human, he was legend. And in the way of dragons, they honored him endlessly, letting the story live on in every flight, every roar, and every heartbeat. The sun rose over the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the dragon nests that clung to the cliffs like living monuments. The wind carried a scent that reminded the dragons of fire, of smoke, and of a human who had once walked among them with courage that defied mortality. Even generations later, the exiled warrior's actions had become more than memory, they had become legend, a story carried not in books or words, but in the very hearts and instincts of the dragons. High above, the eldest dragon stretched its wings, scales gleaming like molten silver in the morning light. It looked over the valley where younger dragons played, their movements bold and confident. The elders had taught them of the human who had once given his life to guard a nest, who had stood unflinching in the face of death. That lesson, repeated in rumbling growls and soft vibrations, had taken root deeply. Every hatchling knew instinctively that bravery was not about strength alone. It was about heart, and the human had more than any dragon had ever seen. The youngest dragons would often fly to the cliff's edge, looking down at the forested valleys below. Their eyes, sharp and bright, searched for danger, yet they carried a calm that came from understanding. The human had shown them that fear could be met with steadiness, that even in the face of overwhelming threat, courage could guide action. The dragons repeated this lesson to each other, not in words but in movements, in shared glances, in the careful way they approached their own young. It was a legend lived in practice, not just in memory. Sometimes, from the valley below, humans would wander near the cliffs. They had no idea that they treaded among creatures whose lives had been shaped by one of their own. When dragons observed these humans, there was a silent awareness, a careful weighing of intent. They remembered the exiled warrior and his selflessness, and it informed how they responded to others. Trust had to be earned, yes, but the memory of courage and warmth opened their hearts in ways they could not articulate. In the quiet moments, when the wind swept through the peaks and the sun glinted off the jagged rocks, the dragons would gather in small clusters, communicating through low, resonant rumbles. The story of the human who had protected them was told again and again, each retelling carrying a weight heavier than gold. They did not need words to convey it. Every beat of wings, every flick of tail, every protective glance at a nest of hatchlings held the story's essence. Young dragons learned to honor courage, to recognize selflessness, and to respect those who acted for the good of others, no matter the species. Sometimes, the dragons would catch the faintest hint of a human scent, earthy, smoky, and faintly metallic. Even though the warrior had long since left the world, the scent brought a flutter of memory, a reminder of his hands steady on the rocks, his eyes calm in the face of danger, and his unwavering determination to keep the hatchlings safe. That memory was more than sensory, it was woven into the dragon's instincts. It shaped their responses, their judgments, and their choices. Even the young, who had not been alive when the warrior sacrificed himself, understood. They would pause in flight at the edge of the cliff, tails flicking, wings braced against the wind, as though listening to a voice carried across time. The elders would nudge them gently with a claw or a nudge of the head, teaching them that courage could exist in anyone regardless of size, species, or strength. Every action was a living tribute to the human who had given them life in ways beyond simple survival. The legend extended beyond the dragons themselves. Hunters and travelers who had glimpsed the cliffs spoke of massive wings and eyes that seemed to understand their thoughts. They told tales of dragons who watched and judged, who protected what was sacred without needing commands or explanations. Though they did not know the full story, the humans' bravery had created ripples in the world, shaping the way dragons interacted with all who entered their domain. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the cliffs glowed gold and crimson, the dragons gathered together in a ritual as old as memory. They rumbled and vibrated in unison, a symphony of remembrance. They honored the warrior, whose courage had forged a bond not just of gratitude but of legend. Every eye gleamed with understanding, every scale shimmered with recognition, and every heartbeat echoed with respect. The story had become eternal, etched into the air, the stone, and the wind. Even as storms came and went, as predators prowled and challenges arose, the dragons remembered warmth and bravery. They remembered a human who had given everything to protect them, who had faced fear and death without hesitation. That memory guided their actions, influenced their teachings, and inspired the young to understand that true courage is timeless. The exiled warrior had passed from the world of humans, but he lived on in the highest cliffs, the coldest winds, and the hearts of dragons who had learned to honor greatness wherever it appeared. As night fell, stars twinkling like distant fire over the mountain peaks, the dragon's eyes reflected the constellations. Their wings shifted softly, a gentle rumble vibrating through the rocks. In their silent communication, in the careful tending of nests, in every instinctive protective move, the legend endured. The warrior had become more than a human. He had become a symbol of courage, selflessness, and honor. His story, forged in fire and sacrifice, would never be forgotten. And so, on the highest cliffs of the mountain, the dragons kept their watch. They remembered the warmth he had given, the bravery he had shown, and the life he had protected. The legend of the exiled warrior was alive, eternal, and burning brightly in their hearts. Every flap of wings, every rumble, every protective glance at a hatchling whispered the same truth. Courage and kindness transcend time, species, and fear. The human had become a legend, and dragons, in their own way, honored him forever.